The squirrel was magic!
Beware your human heart. This is Diabolical Index entry number 9 for Monday, June 25th, 2018, where the pages of the uncanny reside. Live as always from the Nut House. Well, not always from the Nut House, but lately we've had to go to the Nut House for a few technical reasons, and one of which, another one to add to the pile, happened on Friday. I came home from work. And I had a literal waterfall coming through the ceiling of Paradox City Books and Games. And luckily, nothing, well, not nothing. Not nothing. There were things that were damaged, but it was nowhere near as devastating as you think. A great deluge of water coming into a place that deals in paper would come out. I lost a few. There were a few that were lost. Dead, drowned soldiers. That's all right. I don't know how long it went on, and now there's a strange smell to the joint that I have to get rid of. It kind of smells like, if anyone's seen the movie Creepshow, it smells like what Ted Danson looked like at the end of that episode. But that's okay. It won't last forever. We shall sally forth. But speaking of sally forth, I had a couple of shout-outs today I didn't want to miss. And the first one is for you, big boy. Hopefully you're tuning in tonight. I didn't give a whole lot of preamble that I was going to be on tonight, just due to the circumstances beyond my control. But this is going out to you, Henry Perez. Thank you so much for tuning in. You're one of my big faves, as always. And just to everybody out there, just to let you know what, one little rinky-dink podcast can do, or at least lead to. Old Henry, apparently he was so taken with Choose Your Own Adventures from the non-entry episodes that he's taken up reading them, and his mom is going to pick him up some Minecraft ones, and I can't remember the other two really good ones, the titles that she's going to pick up for the Choose Your Own Adventure line for him to sink his teeth into. And apparently, total esteem, I guess when fall school sets in again, he plans to start his own book club at school. So I could not be more happy for Henry Perez. Totally awesome. There's nothing as fulfilling as creating, bringing things to other people, and seeing if it takes off, see if they're interested, and maybe bring them some wonder, and and bring some things into their lives that they may have overlooked due to so many other distractions that we have, and sensory stimulation other than the written works and the printed page. So I salute you, Henry Perez. You're one of the good ones. You're one of the best ones. And we haven't personally met, but I've seen your smiling mug in a bunch of photographs. So I know exactly who you are, buddy. And I salute you. You're one of the best. So anyway, that aside, I also want to salute HM&M Films, Tony and Tom, and Dan and Rebecca. I don't know how much I can talk about when it comes to it. Hi, Mel. I'm waving back. But Blood Moon River, their film, is going to be a lot more readily available than it was before coming up pretty soon. They're hard at work on it right now as we speak. Probably as I'm doing this podcast right now, they're hard at work doing some very, very, very grueling, tedious work when it comes to it. But when it's done, it's going to be in the grubby hands of a lot of people that wouldn't have seen it otherwise. So there are big things in store for HM&M Films. Not the least of which is the second annual Midwest Horror Fest for 2018, and I have been slacking on my pimping for sure, because I'm a judge of that that Horror Fest. I got mixed up with the Action Fest earlier this year. The Horror Fest Part 2. There are a lot of movies that I've yet to watch, and I'm apologizing to them readily if they're listening. They're too busy probably, but there are a lot of them. I think that's creeping up on 300 entries right now, so I got a lot of work cut out for me, and they've already made some selections with the judges that have been doing their part, so I had to get on the ball, otherwise I won't have any dogs in the game. But in this last Action Fest, I was lucky enough to have a lot of the selections pop up, and I recognized them. So in this case, the ones I missed out on will just be all that more the fresh when I go in on October and check them out in Logansport at the esteemed State Theater in Logansport, Indiana. So HM&M Films, Garage House Studios, Rad Entertainment, all those folks out there, congratulations. Things are getting big. I hope they only can get bigger for you. So another thing is that this week, and last week it would have been, turns out that I don't have a whole lot of deaths to go over this time. For whatever reason, I just didn't. Nobody grabbed me. I wasn't familiar with a whole lot of the deaths that came up on the docket. So I do have some really, really, really important births, though. So I think, let's see, what order shall I? I think I'll do it in chronological order. So let's go with the earliest first, and that would be H. Rider Haggard was born this month. And H. Rider Haggard, for those who aren't in the know, if you've ever seen the questionably made film League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I'm not knocking the film too much. It was fun. It was a folly. It was some entertainment. But what I'm more interested in is the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comics by Alan Moore, Kevin O'Neill and Alan Moore, which ended up going into the later adventures of Alan Quatermain, which was one of H. Rider Haggard's most popular characters. And he was involved in King Solomon's Mines and She. Or actually, I don't think he's involved in She. But he was one of the recurring characters in H. Rider Haggard's work, which was King Solomon's Mine and Aisha and She. And I know I'm forgetting one. It's on the tip of my tongue. But it was, by today's standards, I mean, there was always, there were always native tongues and heathen gods and works in the darkest of Africa and things like that. So it is very behind the times when it comes to that. But the adventure is the same. And as far as I know, I think that there was a camaraderie with, I mean, the absolute great white hunter. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He was white as driven snow. But there was a lot of ancient rites and forbidden kingdoms and treasure to be had and things like that. So it's just that old school adventure that I've always had a thing for. I mean, Fu Manchu, that was one of my favorites, and it's still a lot of fun. There are definitely some antiquated ideas and morals in those books, but it's fun. You have to think of it. You have to look at it as a historical record of the culture of the time. I mean, I'm terrified to think of how and if someone could ever fully understand the cultural framework that we're dealing with now. It's so complex that looking back on this antiquated stuff, Despite the pitfalls, sometimes it's just quaint to see these things. But anyway, H. Rider Haggard, born this month of June. The second one on the list might be a little bit more recognizable to most of you, with a political bent or a historical bent, and that would be George Orwell, creator of 1984, Animal Farm, and others. Those are kind of like the biggies. He kind of not necessarily rewrote the outlooks and opinions of an era, of a generation. Kind of the best writers, the best thinkers are usually the ones who kind of shed a light on things that we already know and understand. They basically tell us things that we already know in a different way, so that we realize whether or not they shine or if they tarnish our lives. So George Orwell was definitely one for exposing some of the hypocrisies of the political climate, and cultural climate, people, places, the things that kind of went unspoken, and the things that were untold or told every day, but just from a place of indifference or lackadaisical attitudes towards the way we treat other people, the way we treat ourselves, allow ourselves to be treated, countries at large, things like that. And you know, it's such an established group of works that now it seems almost cliche or, you know, pat that you're going to bring up George Orwell when you talk about some of the injustices and some of the dark dystopian times that we tend to overlook in favor of a partisan view on one side or the other. But there are many lessons to be learned. There are many things to be understood, recognized. I mean, when would there ever have been a time that doublespeak is rampant than now? I mean, it's everywhere, absolutely everywhere. I mean, if you have to distill every opinion down to a certain number of characters, and those characters are seen by people. I mean, in this case, it almost seems like 1984 undershot the mark. Brave New World undershot the mark. That's Aldous Huxley, but it's the same idea. Anthem, Ayn Rand. I mean, everything undershot the mark. We never could have ever dreamt where we would be or where we would have been now. And the things that we allowed to happen, the things that we see every day and brush off. Who would have dreamt it? And they just scratched the surface with their works. But that doesn't make them any less important, especially to the younger people taking it on and seeing it from every side, if they can manage it, is difficult now. More than ever, it's difficult to figure out which side is truly exposing all. So anyway, done with that rant. It makes me wonder sometimes what the future holds. I do it every day almost. I look at people and say, I can't even imagine what 2030 is going to be like. But trying to extrapolate what's going to occur from what we can see is difficult. It's difficult. So many things are virtual. Things that were purported to be small ended up becoming larger just so we can entertain ourselves more, and things that were meant to be large end up being, you know, able to dance on the head of a pin. So it's hard to say. Can't even imagine. Let's move on. George Orwell, born in June, and the world is better for it. So the last one on my list is a personal favorite of mine. His constituents have kind of explained him as a person who, if he was given a week to write a book, people wonder what he would do with the other 5 days that were left. It's Lawrence Block, creator of Bernie Rodenbar, the Burglar series, And on the other hand, he kind of has on the other hands where Bernie Rodenbar and the burglar, burglars can't be choosers. The burglar in the closet. If you look at any of these books and check them out, you'll find that there's an awful lot of humor, but it's always at the end of the point of a knife a lot of times. But with those books, you can see I can't help but think that Bernie Rodenbar is the closest to Lawrence Block himself. He wrote a book on writing called I think it's called How to Lie and Deceive People, or something like that. How to Get Rich Telling Lies, something like that. And especially when you hear him read his own audiobooks, you can just tell that's Bernie coming out of the speakers. But he's also written a hard-boiled type, the Matthew Scudder novels. They ended up making a movie, I think it was 8 Million Ways to Die, with Jeff Bridges as Matthew Scudder, alcoholic, ex-cop. And they're just as fantastic, even more so in a lot of ways. And he maybe not most recently, but pretty recently came out with a character named Keller, who is kind of a quirky hitman with a heart. And I would hesitate. I wouldn't even try to compare him to someone like Dexter. It's just that when you see a hitman hiding out in the garage, wondering, how he's going to garrote someone with piano wire quick enough so that he can get enough money to collect his favorite stamps, it really ends up being interesting. I was hoping that they were going to try. I'd heard some rumblings they were going to try to have Jeff Bridges back for a Lawrence Block Keller book. The first one was called Hitman, and then Hit List, Hit Parade. It kind of had that series. But I haven't heard anything yet, so we'll see. I tend not to be very positive about those types of things. After all, when Richard Stark or Donald Westlake, pick your pick, ends up dying, and then for some reason Jason Statham becomes his titular Parker character, and it basically goes somewhere where no one can ever return. I doubt that anyone has even cared about that movie, but in Lawrence Block's case, he's very, very, very prolific. I recommend reading any of his works. He puts out a lot of short story collections. I think one's called Enough Rope, and it's just a doorstop. It's massive. This guy writes like breathing. I would imagine him and Stephen King get along pretty well if they've ever met, because they probably just sit around complaining about how fledgling writers, ask them how they could possibly write so much, and they just look at each other and go, whatever. I could write a book in 2 days. So anyway, Lawrence Block, born in June. I kind of like it that I didn't have... there are deaths that occurred in the literary sphere during June, but I either didn't recognize... I just don't... Unless I'm familiar with someone, a lot of times I don't like bringing it up, because I kind of don't have any, I don't have any experience. I wouldn't want to talk about something I wasn't at least mildly familiar with. So, there you go. All right, so I've got 2 books on the docket from last Monday that I had checked out, and they are really something. A lot of times when I pick these, either I have a really concrete plan where I have a definite juxtaposition I want to try out, or I just kind of go in at random and try to find something that I wasn't aware of and try to, bring it into the light. So the first one I'm going to talk about is definitely not out of the light. It's the creator of Rambo, John Rambo, from the First Blood novel. It's David Morrell. He's a writer of many things. He's written for years and years. And I haven't read a whole lot of his work, though. But when I read First Blood, I was totally taken aback at how different, but how just fresh it seemed in comparison with the movie. The movie was great, too. First Blood is one of my all-time favorite movies. But when you get to know the character from the book, it really solidifies my the way I like to do things when it comes to book-to-movie adaptations. For me, and I've had many arguments about this, for me, it's always the movie first, if I can manage it. I actually bought Area X, the trilogy that Annihilation came out of. That the movie with Natalie Portman came out not too long ago, and Oscar Isaac, from the maker of Ex Machina. And I bought the Area X trilogy. I hadn't gotten to it yet. It was still in my to-read pile. And I actually waited, and I just bought the film, and I'll be watching that first. But in this case, First Blood was a fantastic book, and it brought a whole new tenor to the idea of Rambo, the character. And so I wanted to read a lot of his books, but he tends towards series sometimes. And my dad ended up having a lot of his. He had one called Brotherhood of the Rose and the Fifth Dimension or something like that. And there are characters where you kind of have to follow them through a series. And this is no different. You brought that up? I can't see. For Creepers yet?
You haven't seen the name of it.
Okay, Creepers. I didn't say it yet. I got rambling. But this one is called Creepers, and when I saw the cut, it's definitely one of those books where you see the cover and the design really makes you curious as to what's going on in the book. And the name itself is just it was short and it was to the point, and it reels you in. So I have to say, with all honesty, that this one didn't turn out the way I planned. But before I get into that, I'll talk about the book itself. I mean, you see the cover. This is my own. I don't know what you'd call it. I guess that it's a guilty pleasure, but I almost always prefer the British or European versions of books covers, just the editions all together, for whatever reason. I have no idea. I like the type better. I like the differences in the words from theirs to ours. Just for some reason, I just always prefer the way they're set up. So the cover that you see is not the cover that was on my American version that I read. But I know that this isn't one of the Demon Seed problems where it had been completely edited in a different direction due to the passage of time. This is definitely one that stuck around because it's not very old. It's actually quite recent. So I had been curious about it for a long time, and it kind of served as the basis of how I picked my second book. So anyway, the character's name is Frank Bellinger, and from the moment it begins, it actually almost made me laugh because he's one of those characters where you can tell someone is definitely, I don't know, flexing the masculine hero worship muscles on this one. I apologize. I'm having to employ cough drops and water because I had my first oil fire in the kitchen last night, and I breathed a lot of black smoke. I ended up blowing my nose this morning, and it looked like a coal bin. So, anyway, sorry about that. Anyhow, Frank Ballinger, as the book goes along, he just gets definitely not macho. He's not macho. It's just that he somehow has every skill you could possibly need at any one time. But on the other hand, he does have fears. He suffers from PTSD in a pretty major degree. I think that heights is part of it and things like that. But Ballinger finds himself in the employ of Professor Conklin, who leads a group known as the Creepers. Now, this is what originally when you see the cover, and actually not so much with the cover that you see that we have up, but the American cover actually has a door. You see a door like a hotel, and it kind of like brings back a little bit of the Shining-esque type of feeling. I can't remember what the I think it was like 610 was the number of the door, and there's a sign on it that says "Do not enter," and they refer to this as a horror book. And from the beginning, you would kind of get that impression. But basically, the beginning is the most important part of all. When you turn to kind of like the acknowledgments page, there is a quote from infiltration.org, which is it's a website that's still around, and it's kind of curated by people who knew the founder of infiltration.org, who was one of these creepers. I don't think that they used that term. They use another term, and it's slipping my mind right now, but it's like infiltrators is what they like to call themselves, something like that, where basically when there are buildings, places, environments that are shut off from the normal modern degradation, decay, when for whatever reason they're shut up and you can find your way into them illegally, absolutely illegally, because it's always trespassing. But they try to keep everything just as it was. They try to cause as little amount of damage as possible. They don't even use the defunct restrooms. They take everything they leave behind. So, but I guess that this infiltration.org, when I saw the quote from it, sometimes there are fictional quotes in the beginning. I think there was one in the beginning of The Circle as well, from characters or places or associations that are in the book but don't exist in real life. But infiltration.org does, and they actually have books that are written by the founder available on that website, and it's a fascinating thing, thinking about people going into a building that was completely locked up, shuttered up, boarded, and when they go inside, they might discover, something left over from the Victorian era that was forgotten to time. So that's the basis of the book. When you see the cover and you see the name, you think horror, absolutely. But as you start to read, I was totally gripped by this book. From the beginning. I'm putting that out there. I was totally gripped by the idea, by the characters, by the situations from the beginning. And I'll tell you how far that goes. Penetrators, that's probably close. That would make sense, really. Although penetration, I don't know. That kind of has a nasty connotation on that one. I'm not sure. It kind of has the smell of taking something, but maybe, I'm not sure. Like I said, it was last week, and to be honest, like I said, I liked it from the beginning, but yeah. Anyway, I don't want to get off track. So basically, Ballinger meets these infiltrators at a motel, and Professor Conklin, their leader, basically explains that, the young people that are with him were his finest students, and they had this prize building that they wanted to infiltrate, and they had gone on little illegal excursions here and there, going into broken down old carnivals and different historical buildings that had been shut up, and all that kind of thing. But kind of like the Mount Everest of what they were interested in was called the Paragon Hotel. And just as it went along, it was just so damn interesting when I was going through this. There were so many things that it reminded me of. The whole story as it went along, it just kept throwing in elements that reminded me of, not that it wasn't its own thing. It was definitely its own thing. But there are just so many things that kept popping up that reminded me of stuff that I loved, that I was just getting totally wrapped up in this book. And basically, the Paragon Hotel was the brainchild of this guy named Morgan Carlyle. And it took place during, I don't know, kind of like the Roaring 20s, maybe a little bit before. And he had come into an inheritance, but he was a hemophiliac, and I think he was also an agoraphobic or something, where, he was shut up into this recluse's life, but he had all this money to deal with. And he wanted to make this fantastic hotel. And what he managed to do was make this kind of Art Deco Mayan pyramid on this this part of an island. I think it might be around Long Island or something like that. But it's one of those things that it was just straight out of House on Haunted Hill or something. It was great. When you think about this kind of like building that doesn't make much sense to where its time period or where it is, and it then ends up lends itself to this mystery because it gets populated by the biggest and the best, but also the most infamous. There's a famous gangster that has a penthouse there, and all sorts of. I think it said that Marilyn Monroe had stayed there with someone who wasn't her husband, and all these things. But the point is that since he was an agoraphobic and all these things, there were of course riots during the civil rights movement, and one thing that he had installed were these metal shutters that would close up the very few windows that were actually in the place. And so when everything went haywire and the hotel went down the tubes and he went bankrupt and all this stuff, it just sat there. There was part of some sort of a trust. So when the shutters were put up, it basically locked everything inside. So for Professor Conklin and his creepers, it was the perfect prize. It was the perfect quest to get inside this place. So Conklin is an elderly professor, so he kind of needs a secondhand man who's involved in extra military affairs and all this kind of stuff. He's kind of Ballinger is really mysterious from the very beginning. And as it goes along, you kind of find out what his skill sets are, and you find out what, if any, relationship he has with Conklin. So they end up finding this sewer. I guess the hotel had its own sewer that way, because it's by like a floodplain. So when it floods, then the sewer surrounding it got rid of the excess water, so it didn't flood the hotel. But are we still on? Okay. So they end up entering through this hidden kind of like sewer port. And it just got better and better as I went along. Because they go into the tunnels and they hear movement down there, and they hear scurrying and scuttling around down there. And, they're going along and they're trying not to hurt anything, and they don't want to break any locks, and they don't want to leave any damage and all this stuff. But they brought these squirt guns full of vinegar in case they ran into any rodent problems or anything like that. So, as they go a bit further in, they find these creatures in there. And I can't even tell you how, it was just great the way this was going along. Because for me, the whole infiltration thing, just for no other reason than to kind of document and make a record of and experience this, time out of time that had been closed up in these buildings. And then they get in there and they find these like mutated inbred rats and cats with like multiple legs coming out of one hip and like a cyclopean eye in their face and all this stuff. And it's so great because I found it even better that these creatures didn't just attack them. It was one of those things where, sometimes you come across this stuff and you think like just because they're malformed or just because they're different in some sort of way or hideous or ghoulish in some kind of way that they're deadly or they're on the attack constantly. And they knew that someone was encroaching on their territory, so they made noises and they hissed and they kind of bat at them and stuff. But overall, they didn't really attack him and stuff. And I just thought that was so refreshing when that happened, especially since the whole time Bellinger is just, like I said, he doesn't come off as macho, but it's one of those things where any contingency this guy is ready for, and sometimes it came off a little bit too much. So, I don't want to give away everything, but basically they make it into the center of the Paragon Hotel. And as they go along, they realize that not only was Carlisle an agoraphobic and a hemophiliac, he was also a total, voyeur. He had completely built the place so that where you thought that a room joined up, if you can imagine like a Mayan temple, kind of like, out of Emperor's New Groove or something. I think that might have been Inca. I always get Inca and Mayan screwed up. It's a problem. I'm working on it. But you think that these stone walls joined up, but they didn't. So at certain points in the hotel, he had little areas where he could walk around, and everyone in the rooms couldn't see him, but they could, but he could see them through little cracks here and there. So he would spy on the entire hotel, and he would kind of like live vicariously through them, especially as everyone who was there was infamous in some sort of way. But there was a single skylight, which is kind of at the top of the pyramid, that had given way. So rain had come in and different things. So there are some rooms where the floor would just fall out from under you, and there were some life-threatening things there. But as they went through the rooms, they would find little things here and there that didn't make much sense. Like there was a suitcase on a bed, and what they found inside the suitcase was like incredibly weird. So it turns out that they were almost like tableaus where Carlisle would recreate different lives in the hotel after the hotel had been shut up, when things were left behind, or people had died there or committed suicide there. He would kind of recreate these tableaus from the investigation that would happen. He would keep the records, and then he would just like recreate it, almost like if it was a model or a wax museum. So it just got better and better. I'm looking at my notes here. If anyone has ever seen Hell House or read Hell House by Richard Matheson, I totally recommend it. It's so fascinatingly awesome. The movie's great. The book is great. Hell House by Richard Matheson. And then it turned out that later on in the book, someone actually mentions Matheson. So I was like, okay, well, that kind of parallel, that's not accidental. So, but that's okay. I'm all right with that, because this was definitely its own thing. It just had these tonal moves and echoes of so many things I liked, like 1408, the story 1408 by Stephen King. Don't watch the movie unless you want to. Go ahead and watch the movie if you want to. But when you're done watching the movie, read the story. The story 1408 by Stephen King is fantastic. I can't even describe it. But there were a lot of things with 1408 that reminded me of the Paragon Hotel and Creepers. And also, in Hell House, there was a millionaire and another thing about this Carlisle, he was a hemophiliac, but he kind of put on this show of physical strength. I guess, according to the book, I don't know anything about hemophilia, but according to the book, hemophiliacs are much better off when it comes to health if they really tax their body and increase the physical strength and health of their body. So this Carlisle couldn't go outside and he couldn't get cut or else he'd bleed to death. But at the same time, he was physically imposing, which was like Belasco from Hell House, who was known as a giant. And it turned out that there were some things about Belasco that no one knew that hit some insecurities that forced him to make this larger-than-life persona. So, and Hell House ended up being, they called it like the Mount Everest of haunted houses. So that was the same. And also, it reminded me a whole lot of the Winchester heiress that kept building on the Winchester mansion, thinking that she was going to get set upon by demons or these vengeful spirits if she didn't keep going. It reminded me a whole lot of that. All of this stuff I was totally interested in. Now, I don't know if you're familiar. I'm sure you are. I'm sure everybody familiar at all with reading at length will run across one of those books where you're loving it and you're totally dug in and nothing could possibly go wrong, and then all of a sudden something goes horribly, horribly wrong. I hate to say it because I don't like to, steer people away from anything. But I was so disappointed that I can't keep quiet about it. somewhere near the middle of this book, all of a sudden, I don't know if Morrell had written the first half of this book and then set it down and picked it back up again. I doubt it, because I think that the infiltration.org site, I think the owner or the founder died in 2005 or something like that. So it's a relatively recent thing. It hasn't been around for long. So it just seems so strange the turn that happened in the middle of this book, where I was honestly so dug in that I almost, I wouldn't be what you call a fast reader. I don't consider myself a fast reader, and I'm not so sure that I envy people who can. I don't know. Maybe they can. Maybe there's something that's built, they're wired up in their brain where they can take everything in, and it's there's no loss of anything. It's eidetic in some kind of way. I can't do that. Everything's okay. You can do it if you want to, whatever. But this was one of those times where I thought I was going to read it in one night because I was so dug in and immersed. But then it was just, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe some of the stuff that was happening. And I hesitate to even tell you, because it's possible that it's just, I don't know. Maybe I was liking it so much that some little misstep screwed it up, but I don't think so, because there's nothing I hate worse than when you can totally tell that someone is trying to pad the job, and maybe he wasn't trying to. Maybe it was, maybe it was involuntary, some kind of way where he just got into a rut, so he tried to write it out, and the process, he came up with some of the stupidest coincidences. Oh my God. It was like soap opera level coincidences. And not even, if it would have been like plot twists, it would have been different, because at least then you're kind of like thrown for a loop. I'm just watching it happen like a train wreck in front of me, where I'm just thinking, that's unnecessary. Where did that come from? It totally ruined the book for me. And I totally apologize. I don't like to come off like that. I'm attempting not to do much of a review with these things. I'm trying to instigate discussion and maybe a little bit of analysis, not give too much away, so that I can kind of present it and say, hey, these are some points of interest in this book, and maybe you'd be interested in blah, 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 and try it out and see for yourself. Sometimes reviews they just seem so heavy-handed, and there's a level of ego to a lot of reviews, and I try to steer away from that. But in this case, I don't have a whole lot of doubt that anyone couldn't read this and go, what happened? What went wrong? And the strange part is that there's actually a sequel where Frank Bellinger keeps going. There's another one. And I have them both. This was one of the books that I've gone through. She said, Jen's seriously concerned. What are you seriously concerned about? I mean, maybe she's looking at my pained look as I'm talking about what happens here. I have the sequel, Scavengers, Creepers and Scavengers. I hadn't read Creepers when I bought Scavengers, but for some reason, the whole idea of the infiltration thing from Creepers, I wanted to know more about what was going to happen in the sequel and stuff. But now I am totally gun shy, and it's making me gun shy about everything. David Morrell actually put out a kind of like Jack the Ripper's era group of mysteries. I think there were 3 mysteries that came out. It's like The Subtle Art of Murder, and then some more or whatever. But it really makes me gun shy to even try those, because, especially with a period piece, it seems like there's so many opportunities to do exactly what happened in this book. And I'll be honest, at a certain point in this book, I almost tuned out completely, because the framework of the book completely changed. I don't want to say too. It's difficult not to, but imagine like I'm trying to think of a good. Let's say that you're listening to a song and you really like the song, and you know everything's going great. You're totally interested. You're jamming, and then all of a sudden, clear blue sky. They just throw this gigantic jazz number in there that makes no sense whatsoever. Sometimes it worked. I mean, Bohemian Rhapsody, that's a masterpiece. And there are a lot of things that kind of, get mixed up in there. And it's just, somehow, it's some alchemy. It's total alchemy that made that song work. But in this case, oh, man. I couldn't agree more. You could rewrite that second half in no time. I think one of the things that caught me off guard was, despite the infiltration part, despite there being 4 other characters than Bellinger, for some reason it was so pared down, and it was so simple, and it was so clear, everything that was happening. And then it was as if a bunch of stuff had just been added, and it just muddied the whole thing up. Made no damn sense. There were, I don't know, it was almost like some kind of crazy prophecy. It was weird. And I don't know. There's no way that David Morrell watches this podcast. But if he did, I would totally like to talk to him about what happened, because I honestly can't think that is such a great idea. If anyone can see this, Jen says the assignment is read the book until the point where Corey hated it, and then prompts happen, and then we finish it. That is so great. I totally want to do that, because it's not cheated, because feeling cheated would mean like I own the thing. I don't own it. It's for everybody, and I couldn't. It's one of those things where it's my opinion, but I would almost venture to pay money to anyone who could tell me that it went off seamlessly after this part. I don't have the book with me right now, but if I did, I could probably point you to the exact part when it happened. And really, I mean, oh God, and it just amazes me after all this time. I mean, he's totally gotten all kinds of accolades for his work, and First Blood for. I mean, like I said, I haven't read a whole bunch of his stuff. But First Blood was lean and mean. I'm talking like there was no fat on that book. And not to say that, there aren't really luxurious, lush, dense books that aren't great. There are tons of them. But at the same time, when you have something, I mean, it's almost the equivalent. I'm going on and on about this damn book. I don't know if I'm going to get to the other one, but it's almost as if you get this, fantastic car, and everything is perfect, and it runs like a top, and then all of a sudden you put a spoiler on it, and then you put a light bar on it, and then all of a sudden you put pipes on it, you put all the stuff on it. That was what it was kind of like. There's like mistaken identity, and this serial killer pops up, and just multiple characters like out of the blue. Like at one point, I think that I can nail it down. There's one point where all of this stuff happens inside the hotel. There are all these mysteries, and there are death-defying things. Like but it's not some kind of Rube Goldberg machine. All it is that, a floor had rotten out, and they didn't even know the difference. So they walked in, and they fall through the floor. Like there are really tense moments, and there's intrigue, and there's mystery, and there's something where you don't know if there's something unnatural inside this. They give you all kinds of clues to there being an unnatural force behind all this stuff. Just with kind of like, I hate to say the cover, because, I mean, who can tell by that? But kind of like the attitude of the whole thing. And the fact that they call it a horror novel is ridiculous. Like, after that certain point, which is almost halfway through. It really makes me think that he sat it down, hadn't got back to it, and then he had to make a deadline, and then he just wrote through the weekend and came up with all of this extraneous bullshit that didn't need to be in there. I was so pissed off. And you know, even now, I almost feel like it's a duty to read Scavengers to see if maybe, what's that now? He figures, yeah, just flesh him out. I mean, but see, the character is really, he's almost, you understand the character by the time you get halfway through. You understand him. It makes perfect sense. He's multifaceted. There's all types of things about him. And it's understood. And it didn't take a whole lot to get there. And then, it's almost as if someone said, you know, man, this guy's not going to be very good in a series if you don't give him a lot of other shit to work with. And then he did it. Or, I guess it's totally possible, it has happened many, many times. It's possible that he got too busy. He was coming up on a deadline. Some personal disaster happened. I don't know everything about his life. And he had to pay someone to finish it. Ghostwriting. Happens all the time. Especially like posthumously and stuff. But if that's the case, you can tell it from a mile away. And hopefully, you know, one of his colleagues told him, was like, hey man, that new Creepers is pretty great. Oh, thanks. It was pretty great up until the introduction of these three robbers. So, there you go. That's the beginning of the end. When that happened, that was the beginning of the end. Unnecessary rape bullshit. There's mistaken identity for Ballinger's dead wife. All of a sudden, there's like a double for her. There's a serial killer. It's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? I hate to get this bent out of shape about this. There's nothing that gets me pissed off more than being invested in. I mean, I bet this happens to a lot of people who watch television. I'm sure it happens all the time. And they're just like, man, we'll just watch a different show then. That's not the way I do things. I get involved. I have relationships with fictitious things. I was pissed. And he's got all kinds of everything. He's got, and another thing. Mr. Morrell, if you are watching this, which you're not, that's okay. Maybe one of his friends will just like stumble on it and go, dude, this guy from southeastern Indiana is pissed about Creepers. But that's the thing. He refers to himself as Rambo's father in every one of his Facebook posts. Rambo's father's garden's looking pretty good today. Rambo's father, took a well-needed rest. Rambo's father took a jog around the block. Hey, Rambo's father, try again on Creepers, will you? Damn. I was unnerved. Oh, boy. I'm never going to get over this Dune thing. I'm going to have to read Dune. There's no doubt about it. I found a really cool edition of it, too. Just by accident. For almost nothing. But, yeah. Dune is definitely one of those ones that I have to tackle. And it's the lush, sweeping book. It's not this pared down thing. But, okay, here's an example. When it comes to Frank Herbert, I don't know much about it, really, but God Emperor of Dune, a further sequel to Dune, one thing I do know about it is that it takes place like insanely 1,000 years in the future and resurrects a dead character, and it's just like, how are you gonna... I mean, I guess it makes a lot more sense for Dune. Yeah, Jen's getting her shots in. Anyway, Creepers. How about this? This is the best I can do. The first half is excellent. Past that, read at your own risk. I'm going to read Scavengers just to see if maybe some wrongs are righted. They won't be. They won't be. Anyway, enough about creepers. I'm going to have to drop it because otherwise I will just keep ranting on. And I've been told that people get a real big kick out of seeing me lose my shit over a book. You're probably loving this then. But anyways, I apologize for that. But I can't not tell you. Because, like, you know, I've had people like, you know, little Henry. Henry totally tried out Choose Your Own Adventure in his own time at home. Like, because he liked it on this, you know. I can't say, I can't be one of those guys who goes, Vegemite. You can spread it on bread and it's awesome, even though it's some kind of weird meat paste from the beginning of time. I'm not going to tell you I like it if I don't. I am going to tell you if I like it at the beginning and hate it at the end. I have to. I mean, I feel compelled. So anyway, on the other hand, The Scamp by Jennifer Pashley. This book rocked so much ass. It was awesome. Actually, I normally don't do this, but what's that now? Yeah, I'm just going to read the back. So, did you bring it up? Okay. Yeah, so this cover is one of the best covers ever. It totally gives you everything you need to know about this book that you don't even know, and it's perfect. That cover is perfect for this. Actually, this reminds me of two books that I really, really loved. One was Donnybrook, which I read. I can't remember which episode that was, but I went over that. And the other one is Dead Folk by Charlie Williams. I totally recommend reading that too. But there's such a punchy style. I mean, there's so much heart, and so much grunge, and so much deep, just absolute recognition in these pages. I'm going to read what Dylan Landis, author of Rainy Royal, has had to say about this. It's a little poetic, but I think you'll get the impression that I did. Quote, "The Scamp is knife and velvet, tongue and bone. Its pages smell of pool water, trailer sex, and huffed gasoline. They taste of reservation cigarettes and peaches from the can. Jennifer Pashley tells the brutal, elegiac story of two girls on the move, broken, burning, and so dangerously beautiful." Like I said, it was poetic. But it gets everything across. It's probably better that I really inflated the front end getting pissed about the creepers, because I really don't want to tell you a whole lot about this book. Other than Rael Reed is the protagonist of the book. And she is just like 1,000 girls that you've met in your hometown. She was done dirty by family, and it taught her what she thought love may have been, and then she figured out what love was to her, and she goes after it tooth and nail no matter who is left in the puddle of blood. And she has a relative of hers named Khaki, just like the color. And it was one of those things where you don't have to have gigantic surprises and big time plot twists and all kinds of things like shock ending, shock beginning, shock middle, shock everything. This one is one of the ones that shakes your hand and you realize that they hadn't washed it in a while. And by the time you figure that out, the knife is already in your back. This is, it has got such a style. It's great. It's got it's got insane turns of phrase. Like, you could totally quote any page in this book. I would be really surprised if Palahniuk didn't worship Jennifer Pashley, because it's everything he's got and more. She would dust him up with this, because it's totally it knows what it's got. It doesn't have to tell you what it has, and it doesn't tell you a lot. And when you fill in the cracks, man, it is a ugly picture, but it's not it's so recognizable that it fails to be a letdown. Like, it's not a depressing read, because it kind of puts you behind the scenes of this completely ruined life that someone is just scratching and clawing their way out of to find something else. And not necessarily like something bright and new, but something that is their own, like made by themselves on their terms. Rael finds this guy's got a really weird name, Cooper Gale. And it just seems like every time I read a page of this book, I was thinking of, like, I suppose that it's a little bit more down and dirty. It kind of reminds me of Raising Arizona, except there isn't a smile in the place, because it's just this trailer park craziness, where she doesn't know where she's going to end up. She doesn't know whose arms she's going to be in, but it feels good for a while and all this stuff. And then she runs into Cooper Gale, who's this kind of like, he's this surprise to her, where he's kind of overweight, but not really. He's kind of muscular, but not really. He's big, but not really. Like, he can talk to anybody. I think he's got like a wandering, like one of his eyes isn't quite right. So he's not necessarily the most handsome guy ever, but he'll look at it a certain way, and all of a sudden he just looks like a god. But he's playful enough to like break into this motel swimming pool with, like, 6-pack of whatever, the equivalent of Natty Light, whatever that would be from where they are. And it's like it's a Western story. But I think, I don't know, it's one of those like it's kind of like an every place type of thing. Yeah, she's going off because it feels like I'm getting paid. I don't need anything to go off about this book. It's one of those things where, I went into David Morrell, and I was really, I felt comfortable trying it on for size, because of, just, I don't know, I guess the provenance of the guy. I just felt comfortable going into it like that, especially since, as far as I knew, he did one called Testament, and I think he did one, he may have called The Totem. I'm not sure if The Totem was it. I may be getting Testament and Totem mixed up. But I think that was the closest thing he had come to horror, so when Creepers came out, and I thought it was Dave Morrell doing horror, I was really pumped. But in this case, I didn't know a thing about Jennifer Pashley. So when I picked this up, especially since, I probably should, but I don't. When I get two books for these, and I get both of the books, I probably should read a little bit of one, a little bit of the other, a little bit of one, a little bit of the other. That way it's, I probably should, but I don't. I read them one, and then I read the other. In this case, oh man, it was such a breath of fresh air to read this book after what I had just read, because there is no filler. Everything is astounding about it. But it's astounding because it's familiar. Everything that's in these books, maybe not part of it, but the part that I'm referring to, it doesn't necessarily come out of left field. It's almost as if it was always there, but you see it from a different perspective, and it's just bone chilling. It's bone chilling. So you've got kind of like this scummy odyssey, and you have this female protagonist who's just going after it if she wants to, whenever she wants to. And then you have this really strange reporter who is going around trying to find out the mystery of these missing girls. And it turns out that their meeting is one of the coincidences that work. Someone I read somewhere, someone was talking about, like fiction is coincidences. It's just, you kind of have to, it's sleight of hand. You have to be able to, everyone knows it's coincidence, but they don't see it as one of those things like, oh, of course that was going to happen. It's just one of those things where it adds to everything, and it causes kind of like this celestial geometry to the whole thing, where it ends up rounding out in the end and everything makes sense, or absolutely doesn't, to the point where it's just like a gut punch. So read The Scamp, period. In fact, I don't want to say it. But I almost want to say, don't read Creepers if you don't want to be disappointed. Period. The pound, I can't help it with the Pound Act comparison, because, and also, another thing, it reminds me, actually, I think it's better than Pound Act, because there's not this self-awareness of your, of kind of like the virtuosity of your craft or whatever, where I can just see Pound Act like doing it and just kind of like looking at it and going, man, that was really good. But in this case, I can just see someone furiously, I'd be really surprised if this wasn't just like a notebook that someone had to transcribe and put in the type. But it's not a stream of consciousness as someone like Bret Easton Ellis, for instance. It's not a stream of consciousness as that is, but at the same time, these seem like thoughts. They seem like opinions of what's happening around her. It's really something, and actually, it's kind of dense. You get a lot for what's going on here, but it's in such a conversational tone that gives you so much with so little. I thought it was great. Jennifer Pashley, I'm not sure what else she's done. This came out, the first U.S. edition was 2015, so there's probably more. I'd be really surprised if there wasn't more. I just turned to a page and I can't even say what happened. But it doesn't seem heavy-handed. It doesn't seem overplayed. Somehow you're looking at this stuff and you're like, wow, I can't believe that went through so seamlessly. I can't believe that was so smooth. Like, you read something completely brutal, but it's totally seamless with the rest of this life that you're reading in this. Yes, The Scamp, Jennifer Pashley, totally recommend it. Not for the faint of heart, though. I can tell you that. Absolutely not for the faint of heart. But I'd be really surprised that anyone who came from a small town where people weren't doing well, I'd be really surprised if they didn't find something in there that was familiar. It's 404. Page not found. Right? Is that page not found, 404? It's 404 pages. So, to someone like Jennifer, I'm sure that doesn't seem like much. But there's just a lot there. It's like a whole life here. And it is a dark life. But I was enthralled. It's one of those things where I was so in that I think I almost have to read it again to maybe even pick up on a lot of the subtleties, because I was so in. And for being like, I find it like, she said, how thick is it? Well, it's not as thick as some, but what's there is so dense that You would think that it would be a slog to get through, but it's got a quick pace. And maybe it comes from the conversational tone. There's nothing that moves faster. Like I said, Lawrence Block, born this month. Lawrence Block was big, or is. He's still around. He's really big on snappy dialogue. He's got some of the best dialogue in the mystery business, in my opinion. And it moves it along. So you barely even notice that it's there. In this case, it's not so much dialogue as this inner monologue. And it moves. And it moves to a lot of places that you're scared you're not going to get out of. That's for sure. Which is basically like the thesis of her life, I think, this fictional character. Who totally translates to anyone you've ever known. Or not anyone. Not anyone. But let's see. Well, okay, so this shows why her pace is probably on point. Jennifer Pashley is the author of 2 short story collections. So she won, let's see. She won the Red Hen Prize, the Mississippi Review Prize, the Carve Magazine Esoteric Award for LGBT fiction. So she moves in all kinds of circles, and there's no doubt there's nothing heavy-handed about this book, and you could totally she could have really gone into that realm with this. But yeah, simple as that. Read the Scamp. If you got the stomach for it, if you have the oh my God. The hating on the paperbacks. I just don't... Listen. This is not a book that wants to be revered. It doesn't have... it's not so classy as to... fakely classy as to need some sort of embossed, embroidered cover or anything. I would really be surprised if that ever came out in a hardback book. But if it did... I would hope that it was like one of those permabound library editions where they just kind of put that really hard, ugly colored cover all over it, and then just stamp the title on the spine of it, so you could drag it through the mud and kick it down the steps and it'd still be okay. I think that would make sense. Which makes it out to be acting tougher than it is. So I don't want to even say that about it, but. Yeah, I'm really lifting it up, but see, this is in comparison with that son of a bitch in Creepers. So I'm gonna go off about it because in comparison, and maybe who knows? You could try it out and you just be like, yeah, that book wasn't anywhere near as good as Corey said it was, and you could be right. You could be right. I doubt it. I really would be surprised if. Hey, Jennifer, you like what you like? That's totally fine. For me though, I mean, I can't. I borrowed it. This is a library edition. I don't have. I wish I had this for myself. I'll probably be ordering it, I'd imagine. I can't see the last one. This went over. Oh, okay, there it is. Yeah. So I'm over here still. Yeah. Creepers, oh God. Okay, I'll try Scavengers. Let you know what I think of it. I probably won't do it as an episode because that wouldn't make much sense. Wow. I guess I hadn't really thought about what I would do if there was a series that I wanted to do for these, because I'm kind of like a lot of times I try to juxtapose the. In this case, the only juxtaposition that made sense is. One really hurt my soul, and the other one brought it back, in a really dark and dingy way. So anyway, go out to your nearest anything, hopefully local, and find Creepers. Let me know if I am totally full of it, if I'm completely mistaken, and definitely buy a copy of the Scamp, and give it a go. Again, thanks to Henry Perez for just being awesome yet again. And let me know, Alina or Henry, both, whatever, either one. Let me know if that that book club goes off, send me photos. I will totally post them everywhere. I'm really interested. So let me know what happens with that. Keep tabs on HM&M Films, Garage House Studios, and Rad Entertainment online, everywhere you can totally find them. They've got all kinds of stuff out. They got their fingers in all kinds of pies. They are definitely a lot of great people to keep tabs on. They are wonderful, wonderful pals, and fine souls, all of them, every single one. They don't have an ounce of egotistical bullshit in their bodies. They just want to create and have fun doing it, and maybe put a little bit of sleaze on there if they can. So there you go. Anyway, beware your human hearts. This has been the Diabolical Index for June 25th, 2018, where the pages of the uncanny reside. And I think that's it for me. Hopefully I didn't scare anybody away with that tirade. But, that's what happens when you keep it squirrely.
The squirrel was magic!